Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin. Chapter 23. It had become their little routine after that first day on the swing together. Even as the weather fluctuated between freezing and just damn cold, as Riel put it, they'd met each morning at the swing. Riel would finish her morning sweep, and Scylla would be watching and waiting with mugs of tea or coffee. This particular morning, the early forecast had promised a beautiful day. One of the oddball days where Mother Nature remembered the warmer weather fondly and gifted would-be Christmas shoppers, hunters, or just two people in love a nice day to be outside. Riel planned to take full advantage of the warmer weather. She made the preparations and, after consulting with her father and Ashley, had put things into motion. She didn't tell Scylla anything about it, save that during the evening hours Quinn and Edwin planned to have a fire in the fire pit after dinner. As Riel mounted the porch steps, already dressed for the day in jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a blue flannel jacket, she smiled at the sight of Scylla waiting for her with a steaming mug of coffee. Riel leaned in, capturing the musician's lips in a good morning kiss, and then accepted the offered mug and settled down on the swing beside her. "Sleep well?" Scylla asked, and smiled when the blonde nodded. "You?" "I fell asleep with a book in my hand last night." The musician tried to recall when she had felt this safe and relaxed. Riel smiled at the image in her mind. She checked on Scylla more than once during the nightly rounds and had found her that way, sleeping with a book still open on her lap. She'd seen her last night as well, but wouldn't tell the musician that. Only Porter knew about her nightly ritual, having caught her standing in the doorway of Scylla's room one night, not long after they had arrived at the farm. Even after they'd confessed their feelings to one another, they still hadn't been intimate again. It was as if they had some unspoken agreement to take things slow and explore this new development of their relationship. Riel was all for taking it slow, but she missed the way Scylla felt beneath her. She missed being inside of her, tasting her, holding her through the night. "Penny for your thoughts," Scylla said, bumping her shoulder into Riel's and breaking the blonde's train of thought. Riel looked over at Scylla, blushing slightly, and was surprised to see the same desire she felt reflected in the cerulean gaze of the musician. She felt her pulse quicken, and she took a drink of the still almost too hot coffee to distract herself. "It's going to be nice today. The weatherman said it will get up to 65 by midday." "And that's got you quiet? I would have thought you'd be thrilled that it will be warm." Riel took another sip of her coffee and then smiled at the musician. "I was thinking that I would like to take you out across the road to my aunt's part of the farm. There's some nice trails out there." "On horseback?" Scylla asked. Riel nodded. "Ash said you were doing really well with tequila." "Okay," Scylla answered, blushing at the compliment. Although she'd probably never be best friends with the veterinarian, with each additional lesson she grew to respect her opinion more and knew that Ashley was reserved with her praise. "Okay," Riel repeated with a smile. They finished their morning coffee and decided to meet back at the swing in 20 minutes. Scylla searched through the wardrobe, trying to pick her outfit for the decent weather and to ride tequila on a date. She settled on an old pair of jeans with a flannel shirt and a jean jacket. Nerves crept over the musician, giving her a smile that only thoughts of Rael brought out. Thinking she was finished early, Scylla stepped back out on the porch, and her azure eyes wide in surprise at seeing that Rael was already outside, and Edwin was handing her a backpack. "There's food at the bottom, and snacks on top if you get hungry. I love you. You kids have fun." Papa Collar walked over to Scylla with a happy grin and offered the brunette a loving hug. It had been years since someone had hugged her that way, and it brought warmth to Scylla as she hugged him back. Looking into her eyes, he said, "Love her hard," with a wink and smile. "With everything I have," Scylla promised, fighting tears of happiness. Scylla quirked a brow at Rael, who had yet to move from the swing, the silent question of what she was waiting for in her eyes. The bodyguard held up a finger for Scylla to wait, with a grin, and then pointed to the opposite side of the house. Byron and Porter approached on their horses, with Tequila and Zorro in tow. The pair both beamed, excited to be a part of this moment. Scylla's mouth opened in awe. It surprised her that her brother was even awake this early. "What is happening?" she asked, watching Byron and Porter exchanging glances. Byron smiled back at his sister. "Well, we all got to talking, and we thought we needed to get out of the house and take advantage of the weather. So we are going on a double date." Rael grinned, pulling Scylla to her side, and the musician gave Porter and her brother a warm smile. "Well, it's about damn time." They laughed, and Byron motioned toward Tequila. "So, giddy up." Rael resisted rolling her eyes, and Porter laughed. "Could you sound any more like the city fancy Quinn accused of us being?" Byron looked at Porter, his expression serious. "You didn't seem to mind how I sounded last night." The blonde blushed, and Scylla groaned as she stepped forward to reach for Tequila's reins. Rael walked up beside her and gave her a leg up to mount the huge horse, hands supporting her as Scylla swung up and into the saddle. Once Rael was sure the musician was safely mounted, she secured the backpack and took Zorro's reins from Porter. The horse stumped a hoof in the dirt, eager to get moving, and Rael took a minute to stroke the horse's neck, calming him. Once Zorro was standing still, she mounted the black horse and offered her dad a small wave before leading the group in the direction of the driveway and the road beyond it. Edwin Collar leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, a smile on his face as he watched the group leave. He heard the screen door and footsteps approaching him. A moment later, Quinn offered him a cup of coffee. "So they're off on their little adventure?" "Yup," Edwin answered, accepting the coffee and taking a long sip. Quinn stood beside her oldest friend's widow and sighed. "I hope Rael knows what she's doing." "Ray will be fine. That girl is strong and she's full of love." "Ray's been through so much pain. I just hope Scylla doesn't break her heart," Quinn explained. Edwin took another drink of his coffee and then looked at Quinn. "I was talking about Scylla. She's a good soul. It's just buried under a lot of pain." Quinn's brows furrowed, and the older woman frowned. "I think she's holding on to something big. Her eyes are haunted. I just hope Ray doesn't get hurt in the middle of this." "I think they'll heal each other," Edwin said. "They better hurry, then they can get that ghost that's chasing them. If they get hurt, oh God help him, I swear I'll go find that psycho myself. I don't care." Yes, we know you will. Enough of this. We have a lot to take care of before tonight, so complain while we work." "Then I'm coming after you, Edwin. I swear, second on the list." "Yup, copy that. I'm second on the list. Speaking of which, get the grocery list on the counter." Dr. Ellis Monroe put down her leather dark brown messenger bag, the same one that Telly had seen when she came across Alice on job sites, and occasionally at her office. Finally comfortable in her seat, the doctor smiled her thanks when the waitress at the cafe delivered not just the cups, but an entire pitcher of coffee to the table. Alice was grateful to Tally for arriving early and taking the liberty of ordering for her. The waitress lingered. "Would you girls like a few minutes with the menus, or do you know what you want?" "I'll take the chicken salad on sourdough," Tally said. "Just a buttered croissant for me," Alice added. The waitress walked away, and Alice looked at her friend's lover. I know you're technically not on the case anymore, but Sarah hasn't been overly thrilled that Raelle did her own investigation, and we've got evidence we can't use in a court of law. Ray knows her stuff, Telly said. If she thought she'd found something, then it's worth taking a look. I agree, Alice said. She pulled out her iPad and a few lab reports, laying them methodically across the table. So what did you find? Telly asked, leaning forward. Have you seen Byron Ramshorn's paintings? No, Telly answered. The waitress brought their food and Alice continued. Well, he's a great artist. He usually does portraits. What does this have to do with what you found? Telly asked, taking a bite of her sandwich. It's relevant, trust me, Alice said and paused long enough to eat some of her croissant. The doctor wiped her fingers and then brought up the painting of Reflected Confessions. This is different, Alice said, turning the iPad so that Telly could look at it. There were rumors about this painting circling in the art world for years. He allegedly painted it right around the time his parents died, but no one saw it until he put it in the opening a couple weeks ago. Then the shocker. He wouldn't sell it. Telly took in the painting of a boy on the swing. It was almost whimsical, yet at the same time realistic. It reminded her of the Garden of Eden, and she couldn't help but shiver. Yeah, it has that effect, doesn't it? Alice said. Yes, it gives me the creeps. It screams that something's not right. But what does it have to do with the stuff Raelle gave you? This place? This is where the mushroom spores and the shells came from. And this is what I found. Alice reached for the lab printouts. We know the lab detected spores in the glue used to create the letters. Yeah, we assumed some sort of mushroom. Right. And you see all the mushrooms there? Telly shrugged. Yeah, but so what? Mushrooms grow everywhere. Alice shook her head. Not these mushrooms. The Corioactis geister, or devil cigar, is extremely selective about where it grows, naturally, and it certainly does not grow in Massachusetts. Alice pointed at the mushrooms in the painting. These are devil cigars, and they're everywhere out there. My guess is Silas Ramshorn's mother was growing them in her hothouse, and they spread and somehow survived. They are researched heavily for medical purposes. Telly shook her head in confusion. What are you suggesting? Alice leaned back in her chair. Alder always thought that it was an inside job, that someone close to the musician was doing this, and it had something to do with a crime that happened on the property long ago and got covered up. The doctor put her iPad on the table, with the painting glowing before them. The notes had letters glued in place to form the words, and those letters had spores on them from a mushroom that only grows in Japan, interestingly, Texas, and in Scylla Ramshorn's backyard. Tell me that's not something. Scylla's backyard? Telly echoed and shook her head. That's a much more plausible cause for the spores to have come from Texas or Japan. Across from her, Dr. Ellis Monroe nodded her agreement. Crossing the road with the horses had made the Ramshorn siblings nervous, but they were able to ride down and across without incident. Once, on her aunt's property, she led them through a series of gates until they reached what looked like a stone foundation. Be careful out here. Somewhere there's a well, not sure that it's still properly marked, Raelle said, turning Zorro away from the structure. What was that? Byron asked. My grandparents had a couple of staff houses out here. Over the years they started to fall apart, and eventually Quinn had them burned to the foundation. I think she was planning to put another barn out here if I ever buy out my aunt. What would it take to do that? Scylla asked, stopping Tequila beside Zorro. Raelle shrugged. It's not really a matter of money as much of me deciding if I really want the property. I hardly have the time to be at my own house, let alone here. Well, you can't be a bodyguard forever, Byron said. Might be a nice place to settle one day. Both Scylla and Raelle looked at the artist, wondering if he realized what he had just suggested. Porter rode up on Jasper and looked at the spot. It's a pretty place. Was this the area we saw from the lookout? Raelle nodded. Some of it. What about the stream? Is that a part of the property? Byron asked. The bodyguard nodded with a smile. Yeah, that's actually our destination. There's a place here on the property where it kind of pools. It will be a nice place to stop the horses and have lunch." "How far?" Porter asked. "Couple of hours' ride from here," Rael answered. "We've got a few rough spots to get through. Should be a nice challenge for us and the horses." Scylla's eyes widened, and she looked at her brother. It was obvious that Rael and Porter would be able to handle the terrain, but she worried if Byron and she had enough experience. Rael smiled at the musician's expression. "Don't worry. The horses know what to do, and you don't want to miss the scenery." The ride went smoothly, despite a couple of extreme steep spots. As they moved further along, they came to an area that was so tight around a drop-off that Scylla thought for a moment the blonde must have taken the wrong turn. There was no way she could see that they could get beyond the area to the other side where the trail widened again. Rael stopped them and explained the horses would need to move in single file. Scylla shuddered as she looked over the hill at the sparkling water below. It was obvious that they were taking a winding path down a mountain to the valley below. "No way," Byron said, peering down the cliff edge. "It can be done," Rael said. "You just need to trust the horse. Direct them to hug the hill." She looked at her riding companions and nodded to Porter. "You want to go first?" If something did happen, Rael wanted one of the most experienced riders on either side of the challenge. "Sure," Porter said. He nudged Jasper forward, and everyone held their breath as Jasper cleared the tight spot. Once on the other side, Porter leaned over, patting the horse's neck, and offered him a treat for his saddlebag. "Byron?" Rael asked. The artist looked as if he'd passed out right there in the saddle, but Porter called to him from the other side, and after some encouragement, the young man rode Winston out. The horse seemed to have a bit of trouble, pausing in the middle, and Byron followed Rael's instructions to urge the horse through the tight spot. Scylla was terrified, but she wasn't about to let that get the best of her. She nudged Tequila forward, and the horse walked a couple of steps and then stopped. The change in locomotion was so sudden, Scylla felt herself shift in the saddle, and she had to grab the saddle horn just to keep from falling out of the saddle and over the cliff's edge. "What the hell?" she muttered, righting herself again. From the other side, Porter and Byron looked quizzically at Scylla and Tequila. She instructed the horse to move forward again, but the blue roan stood still and wouldn't budge. After a moment, Rael dismounted and walked up to the pair. She petted the roan for a moment and looked up into the musician's azure gaze. "He's not going to go until you're ready, and he senses that you're not. You've got to show him that you trust him, or he won't trust you." Scylla met the pale blue eyes of the woman she loved and forced herself to take a deep breath. She nodded, and Rael smiled. "Just take your time." The blonde walked back over to her horse and remounted. The black horse stomped a hoof, eager to move forward. Rael patted Zorro's neck, distracting the horse to give Scylla and Tequila the time that they needed. After a few moments, Scylla bent forward, whispering something in the roan's ear. The horse's ears flicked, turning towards the musician, and after a moment, Tequila walked through the tight spot like it was nothing and joined the horses on the other side. Rael met them with Zorro a moment later, and they all looked back at the cliff. Finally, Byron said, "Do we have to go back across that when we leave?" The bodyguard shook her head. "No, there's a couple of ways back to the house from the stream, and we'll definitely take another route so you can see more of the property." Though Rael's companions didn't respond, they were all relieved. Rael had been right, Scylla thought, as they finally rode the last few feet that led them to the water's edge. The ride had been exhilarating, and the views were fantastic. Once they dismounted, Rael helped Scylla and took her in her arms for a kiss. After they tended to the horses, they turned their attention to the lunch that Mr. Collar had prepared for them. The food was simple: cold fried chicken, various salads, chips, and a few different kinds of miniature pies for dessert. When Porter and Byron first started pulling the food out of the bags, Scylla thought they'd never be able to finish it all. But apparently, riding really did work up an appetite, and soon they were repacking the now empty containers. Mr. Collar had included bottles of old-style root beer to drink, and after helping with the cleanup and checking on the horses, Rael perched on a rock at the edge of the pooled area of the stream and sat down with one of them. Scylla picked up her own bottle and made her way over to the blonde and sat down beside her. They clicked the necks of their bottles together and drank. Byron and Porter exchanged glances and wordlessly walked a little way down the stream, giving Rael and Scylla some privacy. "So, what did you say to Tequila?" Rael asked after they'd sat on the rock for a few minutes, basking in the sun. Scylla gave a small smile. I was singing to him." Rael grinned and looked at the brunette. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" Scylla ducked her head, blushing at the words of endearment. Shrugging, she said, "I just thought it might calm both of us down." "Well, it worked," the blonde said, nodding. She took another pull from the bottle and looked out to the water, enjoying the scenery and the company. She leaned back on the rock, hands supporting her as she gave a consented sigh. Scylla snuck a glance at Rael. The blonde's head was back so her face could feel the warmth of the sun. Her blonde hair caught the light and Scylla's breath hitched. The woman beside her was brave, good, and kind, and most importantly, Rael loved her. She wanted to be with her. Her, the siren, the bitch. She'd done so many things wrong. She just didn't deserve it. As she continued to stare at Rael, she felt her heart start to race. One minute she saw her lover. The next she saw a flashback from her past. Another person perched on another pond. She felt herself starting to panic. With Rael's eyes closed, her other senses were heightened, and she sensed a change in the brunettes beside her. She opened her eyes, frowning at the sight of Scylla, almost shivering beside her, eyes staring out into space. Sitting up, she put a hand on Scylla's leg. "Hey, you okay?" When the musician didn't respond, Rael repeated herself. At the sound of laughter, she looked up to see Byron and Porter approaching. Apparently the sound was enough to bring Scylla back from wherever her mind had taken her, and the musician attempted to smile and nodded at the blonde. "Yeah," she answered. "I just felt a little lightheaded for a second." Rael frowned and looked over at the musician. She seemed physically fine, but it would probably be best to head out. No one should be on a trail ride if they weren't feeling well, especially in a place where it would be hard to get medical attention if needed. "Do you feel okay riding?" Rael asked. "Yeah," Scylla answered, giving Rael a real smile this time. "I've had a lot of fun with Tequila." Rael laughed, despite the serious topic. "Yeah, I know of a lot of people who would say that." Scylla laughed, slapping at the blonde's leg, and met her pale blue gaze with her own azure eyes. "I love you, Ray." Rael smiled and leaned in, her lips meeting Scylla's. They kissed, long enough, deep enough, that both felt their hearts begin to race. It was only with the very loud sound of Byron clearing his throat that they pulled away, both breathless. Scylla looked at Rael with the same desire she had always felt, and the blonde met her gaze with the same unspoken intention. Wordlessly, they got up from the rock and made their way over to the horses. Once ready, Rael assisted Scylla up in the saddle, and they rode back towards the log house and barn. At the dinner table, Rael continued to reach out to Scylla's hand. She was still worried about the musician and whatever had come over her when they were at the stream. When they had a private moment together on the ride back, their horses outpacing Byron's and Porter's, Rael had reminded Scylla that no matter what, she was in it for keeps, and she meant it. Scylla still saw the sincerity, love, and care that was streaming through the blonde's eyes at the dinner table now. It sent a warmth and a tingle throughout the musician's body. The end of the meal signaled it was time for drinks and desserts at the fire pit, and after cleaning up a bit, they went to the backyard. Wood had already been prepared for the fire. A circular stone pit was perfectly centered about 15 feet away from the house. It was far enough from the house for safety, but not so far away that they would get lost going back inside from the fire pit. A couple of coolers were already set up outside along with lawn chairs that surrounded the stone pit. The core four, Byron, Porter, Scylla, and Ray, were just following Quinn outside like little ducklings with their mama. As they walked, the bodyguard gave the group a little background of the fire pit tradition along with some childhood stories. After a few swings of their arms while they walked, Rael caught Scylla's hand and grasped it, interlocking their fingers for a welcomed stolen moment as they found their seats. As the night progressed and the fire burned bright, lighting the group in a beautiful orange tint, Edwin picked up his guitar. "So, who'd like to start?" Everyone looked around at one another, and Edwin let his gaze settle on Scylla. "How about you, dear? You're the professional of the group." Scylla blushed and started to protest when Byron spoke again. "Hey, Syl, sing us that song you wrote for Rael again." At this, Quinn sat up in her chair, and Edwin smiled. "Oh gosh, we'd love to hear that." Now Rael was blushing too, and was about to suggest something else, when Scylla accepted the guitar from Edwin and started to sing. As the intensity of the words, the proclamation of love echoed into the fire-lit night, Quinn found her frown softened by the sincerity of the lyrics. If this woman truly loved her girl like it sounded, then maybe there was hope for them after all. Once the song ended, Quinn looked at the brunette. "That was beautiful, but let's have some fun. Here's my version of a love song." The older woman took the guitar and led the group in a sing-along of Shady Grove. Edwin followed it with another sing-along song from the country, Dooley, and then looked around for the next performer to step up. Between the drinks and the songs, Byron eventually reached for the guitar despite the groans from Scylla and Porter, who both knew the musician's brother could make a dog howl. Before he started, he drunkenly yelled, "Fuck Garrett!" Still, Byron held his own. He did the song justice, and as the laughter calmed down from Byron's cover of Love Yourself, Scylla locked eyes on Rael. The musician had so much she wanted to tell her, but never could find the words. What she always could seem to find was meaning in the music. And then she remembered. "Hey, Porter, remember that Michael Jackson song I made you sing with me at the house? I think we need a comeback performance." Rael had recovered the guitar from Byron to hand the guitar to Porter, and was surprised when Scylla shook her head and then dipped her head towards Porter. Shrugging, Rael handed the instrument over to the blonde. "He is a cowboy that can play guitar and sing? Oh my. You're so getting lucky." Byron tried and failed in the normal fashion at being discreet, but his whisper was the same volume as his normal talking voice, and from across the fire pit, Quinn and Edwin held back chuckles. With the guitar in hand, Porter and Scylla looked at each other as the blonde got ready to start playing. He counted off slowly. Porter started to strum on the acoustic guitar, a familiar bass line. The musician started to sing. Porter joined in as backup. Finally, Rael recognized the song as Scylla sang through the first verse. "Your body's mine, gonna tell you right." These words to the song didn't portray what everyone knew and loved about Michael Jackson's version of Bad. Scylla's version, her eyes, her words, gave almost a warming to those around her. It sounded like her poor soul had felt guilt, and through the words her pain, her torture, was there for the group to see. Hearing Scylla sing was so emotional, and it fueled Rael's desire to show her how much she was loved, how she would do anything to protect her and support her. After the song, all were slow to react because the performance was so raw and powerful, it made the group pause to recover for a second. "Ray, did you want to turn? Haven't heard you play in years. Come on, I know you still have some tricks left. The city can't have made you that soft," Quinn asked, smiling as she poked fun at the dazed bodyguard. Sure," Rael answered, grabbing the guitar back from Porter. She adjusted the straps to fit her. What song should she play? The musician seemed to still not believe her words when she told her that what they have is real, that she wouldn't leave her. If words didn't work, then maybe she should speak a language the musician could understand. With that thought, Rael started to play. "Baby, it's you, you're the one I love." The lyrics from Love on Top were easily recognizable, but as Rael finished the song, pale eyes meeting Scylla's azure gaze, the feelings were felt by everyone around the campfire. Byron looked at Porter with a soft smile, and Edwin discreetly wiped at a tear in his eyes. The song had held a special meaning for him and Willa, and he was pleased to see Rael singing it to Scylla. Quinn smiled, soft and hopeful. At last, Edwin cleared his throat. "Well, it's getting a bit late. Why don't you take the guitar inside, Ray, and the boys can help Quinn and me with the fire?" Ray smiled and turned back to the house, holding her hand out to Scylla. "Want to join me?" Scylla smiled and took her hand and followed Ray as they went back into the house. Around the fire, Edwin told the bodyguard that maybe the musician should hold on to the guitar, so they were off to her room to drop it off. As Rael led Scylla through the dark house, the musician was all smiles, holding on to the person who had captured her heart. The musician stopped before getting to the staircase and caressed Rael's face and leaned in for a deep kiss. The passion was explosive. This kiss was new, different. Something had changed. Whatever it was, it took Rael's breath away. The guitar made noises as the blonde's grip loosened, which distracted the two of them in their moment. Both giggled, and then continued up the stairs toward Scylla's room. Finally reaching the door, Rael entered Scylla's room to place the guitar in a safe spot in the corner. While the blonde placed the guitar in the corner, Scylla looked at her bodyguard and asked, "So, Beyoncé, huh?" With the help of the light from the fire pit peeking through the window, the musician was able to see everything she needed in Rael's eyes when the blonde turned around from safely putting the guitar down. "My mom used to sing that song to my dad. It was one of the first songs I learned to play. It meant a lot to them and to me. Now I wanted to play that song for you, so I did." Slowly, Scylla walked up to Rael and pulled her body into the blonde, kissing her sweetly. Rael deepened the kiss, and as Scylla felt her pulse quicken, that familiar ache beginning in her center, she pulled slightly away from the kiss. Staring into Rael's pale blue eyes, darkened with desire, she said, "I want you to make love to me." The blonde's breath hitched, the words sending tingles throughout her body. She'd never wanted anyone or anything more than she wanted Scylla at this moment. After what seemed like eternity, Rael cupped Scylla's face in her hands and bent her head to gently capture the musician's lips. Holding Scylla's hand, Ray walked back to close the door. Now, where were we? The buzzing of the phone on the nightstand beside the bed made Rael's pale blue eyes snap open, and she reached for it automatically. As soon as she heard her friend's voice, Rael told Tally to hold on for a minute. She looked over to find Scylla naked and sleeping soundly beside her. Gently, she adjusted the covers over her and then quietly slipped out of the bed and pulled on a t-shirt and her jeans, leaving the brunette to her slumber. She opened the door to the bedroom and made her way over to the living area. "Okay, Tally," Rael said. "What's going on?" The redhead filled the bodyguard in on what the ballistics expert and Dr. Marmot had found. It was clear to Rael that something tragic had happened at the pond, and that whatever it was had haunted Scylla. It may have even created some ghosts, one that was killing young women. Rael continued to listen as Tally urged her to talk to Scylla, and eventually got off the phone after promising to try and get some answers again. With a sigh, she ended the call and made her way to the small upstairs kitchen area. She made them coffee, and then returned to the bedroom door. The view was beautiful this morning, but the blonde wouldn't trade being in bed with the brunette for the sunrise. She slipped back into the room, a smile on her face despite the phone call she had just had, until she saw that Scylla was awake and crying. The brunette had put on a t-shirt and was sitting at the head of the bed. She put the coffee down on the dresser and walked over to the bed. "What's wrong, Syl?" "It's just," Scylla shook her head. "This last night. Goddess, I love you so much." Rael's brows furrowed, watching the brunette. "I love you too, Scylla." The brunette made a sound between a laugh and a sob and kept crying. "I don't deserve it. I don't deserve you." "What are you talking about?" Rael asked as she perched herself on the edge of the bed, giving the musician some space, but also letting her know she was close. "The things I've done," Rael sighed. "Scylla, I told you that I don't care about what you did in your past. I love you for who you are now. So whatever is weighing you down, you can tell me, and you won't have to take that weight alone. You have me, and I'm not going anywhere." Scylla shook her head and continued to cry. Riel tentatively reached out a hand, and Scylla took it. "Tell me what happened at the pond, Syl." "You mean yesterday? I just got a little lightheaded." "No. The pond at the house with the tree. The place in Byron's painting." The brunette's head jerked up, and she searched the blonde's pale blue eyes. What did Rael know? "How do you know?" "I know about the sealed files. I know that something happened out there, and that it must have been pretty bad. And I know that it could be linked to what's going on now. So please, tell me. Nothing you can say will change how I feel about you, and no matter what happened back then, we can deal with it together." Scylla looked at the blonde for a long moment. She remembered what Rael had said about trust with the horses, and she thought about what Mr. Collar and even Ashley had said. She nodded slowly and leaned back against the pillows and started to speak. "We moved into the mansion when I was 13. Byron was 15, and we both had trouble adjusting. We just left our friends behind, and by that age, going to a new school to start over was hard. Then, of course, there was the money issue. Our parents had gads, yet they put us in a public school. There were some kids in my class who were never sure they'd have food beyond what the school provided. There was a lot of resentment." Riel nodded her understanding and squeezed Scylla's hand. "Anyway, we ended up kind of making friends with the oddballs, the misfits. Porter, Helen, Clay. They were all between Byron's age and mine, and so it made sense we just kind of started hanging out together. We'd get together at the mansion some evenings, just doing what teenagers do." "Porter mentioned that you all used to get high." Riel prodded gently. Scylla snorted. "Yeah. You know my mother was a botanist. She specialized in studying plant properties for potential use in pharmaceuticals. She had a wide range of stuff grown in her hothouse." "Including psychedelic mushrooms?" Riel asked. "All kinds, yeah," Scylla shrugged. "It was stupid, but it was something to do. Byron hated feeling alone, and hanging out with those guys gave us some friends. And we were both struggling with who we are." "You mean being gay?" After a moment, Scylla shrugged. "Gay, bi, whatever. Helen was obviously gay, and I guess that's what drew me to her. I wasn't sure who I was, but she did. So I followed her like a puppy. Byron was crushing so bad on Clay that it was ridiculous, but Clay didn't seem the least bit interested. In fact, the only reason he started hanging out with us was because he told Byron he had a crush on me." Scylla rolled her eyes and shook her head. "It was so stupid. God, we were all so dumb, but Byron talked me into flirting with him, encouraging him so he'd keep coming around." "And you did?" Riel asked. "Yeah. We actually went out a couple times. He didn't have a license yet, and his dad would drive us to the movies or to the mall. He started to like me a lot. And I admit, I liked the attention. Helen wanted me. Clay wanted me. There were rumors that Porter wanted me." Scylla shook her head, almost as if she were disgusted by her younger self. Looking up into Rael's eyes, desperate for the blonde to understand, she explained. "It was nice to be wanted instead of being the nerdy kid who played the piano, wrote songs, and read books for once. I admit I let it get to my head." Rael looked at Scylla, brow raised. It would be hard to imagine her as a nerdy kid without many friends. Wanting popularity, though, wanting attention. Garrett had told Rael that he had taken advantage of that part of the musician's psyche to create the siren known as Scylla Ramshorn. But as it went on, Clay just became more and more obsessed with me, and more jealous of the others. He told me he loved me, that he wanted to marry me. It was nuts. We were just teenagers. I tried to discourage it and keep it more casual, but it was like he just became crazed. Clay was like that. He had all these weird quirks, like he was obsessed about westerns and he loved guns. I never really knew why. But he'd come over with his dad's revolvers. He took Vi and Porter out with him, and they would shoot tin cans. That's when Helen and I would... Scylla stopped and shrugged. Anyway, one day he came over as usual. The whole gang did. We grabbed some liquor from the kitchen and headed out to the pond. We'd been drinking for a while and we'd started to eat some of the mushrooms. I'd been bitching about Clay to Helen. She seemed kind of pissed too. I mean, she already didn't like that he and I were dating. Scylla said the last words with air quotes. She wanted you to herself? Riel asked. Yeah. That day, we'd all got way wasted. We were hanging out around the hothouses and the pond, and at some point Helen dared me to kiss Porter of all people. God, it was so stupid. But I was so sick of Clay that I thought maybe it would make him realize he should back off. So I did, and Porter and I just both looked at each other. I mean, even with being drunk and high, we both knew that the other was gay. Byron didn't know about Porter? No, Byron was obsessed with Clay, that he couldn't see straight. He was absolutely in love with him, but wouldn't do anything about it. He was pissed about the kiss and about Helen. He was afraid I might upset Clay and then he'd stop coming around. And he did see it, the kiss, I mean. He got pretty upset and I tried to tell him that it wasn't a big deal. I had calmed him down, or at least I thought I had. Scylla shuddered suddenly, memories flooding her mind. Later that night, we kept drinking and getting high. I was so stoned. I don't know for sure what really happened next. I know that at some point Clay was talking with Helen, and I know we were playing stupid games. Truth or Dare, the crazy crap that kids play. Scylla's eyes stared into the empty space between them, her gaze haunted, trying to remember the events she'd fought so long to forget. I don't know whose idea it was, but suddenly we were passing one of the guns around, firing it. All but one of the bullets had been removed. Riel's eyes widened. You were playing Russian roulette? Scylla nodded. Yeah, I guess that's what it was. Riel shuddered at the thought, imagining a bunch of teenagers literally playing with death. The thought that Scylla could have killed herself. Riel held Scylla's hand a little tighter. After a moment, she managed to whisper, Go on. 1 minute the gun was in my hand, and the next it was in someone else's. It ended up with Clay, though, and I remember he just looked at me. God, he looked directly into my eyes, and he just had this look on his face. He fired. Click. He fired again. Click. And then the gun just looked like it exploded in his hand. He shot himself right in the head, in front of all of us. With part of her confession made, the brunette had begun to cry, although Riel doubted that she even realized it. The brunette was stuck in the memory, the trauma of what had happened. Her head was focused on the bed like she was watching it all over again in her mind. I remember hearing screaming. Someone, me or maybe Byron. Porter ran to the house and my father came out. He made all of us go into the mansion and then he placed a call to the police. Riel frowned. So this was what was in the sealed file. A boy had killed himself on the property, and Scylla's father had used his political pull to get his children's involvement covered up. When the police arrived, they came inside and looked at us, and then they all went out to the pond with my father. They were gone for such a long time. Finally, they came back and talked to us. It was Byron first, next Helen, then Porter, and finally me. They gave us the same story. I remember the cops saying Clayton's death was just a tragic accident. He said we should try to not think about it and just move on. The cops and my dad told us never to speak of what really happened. Riel's jaw clenched, but she resisted asking any questions. Seeing someone die, especially someone taking their life, was a terrible burden to bear without being able to talk about it and seek help. and yet it seemed that Sila's father and the police had done just that. She listened as the musician continued her story. Byron blamed me. Well, I think he wouldn't talk for weeks after what had happened. I turned to Helen, but she didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted it to be us, always trying to control me, and she never wanted to talk about Clay. I remember her saying, "Now that Clay is gone, we can be out together." She almost seemed happy about it. I just couldn't deal with that. Finally, I turned to Porter, and he kind of stepped into the role of big brother. We became good friends, and he really helped me get through it. I was still blaming myself, though, and then your parents? Scylla nodded. It was my fault, Rael. It was because of me. Clay killed himself, and then because of me, my parents were killed. And then I lost him too. After that, things changed. I was angry at him for what he did. I wasn't going to press charges on him, though. After my parents died, he came by to offer condolences. I told him to fuck off and slammed the door in his face. He tried calling a couple of times later. He tried calling, offering his apologies again, and just wanted to ask questions about his son. He wanted to go to where it happened. Hearing Clay's name for what felt like 100 times, I flipped. I told him things that I didn't mean. They were cruel and horrible things, but I was far from sober, and I was still angry and young, and he came around the grounds again when I started gaining some fame for singing. Well, Helen caught him before he got far, because she was escorting him to his car when we got home. Then I stopped seeing him. He stopped trying to contact me. "Wait, what are you talking about?" Rael asked, trying to get Scylla to refocus on her original thought. The secret, the sealed files. Were they connected to the psycho hunting them now? The bodyguard had to backtrack to make sure that she understood correctly. "Byron said your parents were killed by a drunk driver." "Who was the driver? Who is this him?" "The drunk driver was Clay's dad, Rael," Scylla explained. "My parents were coming back from some political ball and he crashed into them. He was always drunk whenever he would actually surface out of the house. After Clay died, he lost it. He became an alcoholic, and I'm sure our interactions didn't help him process Clay's death. My parents had run into him on his way to buy more liquor on more than one occasion, and he proudly told them of this destination." Rael shook her head, still not comprehending why Scylla thought that her death was her fault. "You didn't make him drink. You were a kid and he was an adult." Rael frowned, thinking she needed to know more about who this person was, but she could see that Scylla was becoming more upset and had more to tell. "The police came again after the crash, and this time they reminded us about accidents. Tragic accidents, and how in the long run it would be better for everyone if charges weren't pressed. If we just let it go. The police indicated if we pressed charges or made a big deal out of it, then what happened at the pond would have to be re-examined. We were promised that if we kept quiet about the wreck, then what happened at the pond would also be kept quiet." "They threatened you," Rael said, feeling anger build up inside of her. "It was my fault, Rael. All of it." Rael shook her head. "No, Syl. You didn't have the gun. Clay did. You didn't drive the car. His dad did. None of this is your fault." Scylla shook her head and silently sobbed. Rael realized that for all of these years, Scylla Ramshorn had carried a guilt that was not hers to bear, and that those around her had never tried or never succeeded in convincing her otherwise. Rael would try. She would be with Scylla, help her if she could, but right now her mind was racing, connecting the dots. "Scylla, who killed your parents? Who was Clayton's dad?" The brunette looked up at Rael and answered, "Alban Hurst." Before Scylla could say anything more, Rael reached for her phone. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.